What?
He just crashed.
Oh my god!
My name's Robert Scratch Mitchell, and I'm the former team lead of the Snowbirds. And I must start by saying that, I'm not an investigator, and I'm careful not to speculate on anything. But there are some things that are worthy of mention. I can see right away that the wind is calm, as we see that the windsock that's in the foreground is limp. There's several thousand feet or so of cloud distance, so it's not that the clouds are presenting an issue. I can't put hand on heart and say that is a bird, that speck, but it's one of the more risky areas of any aviation is just after takeoff. One of the risk factors is you're close to the ground, and birds are a factor at airports. That's a reality of aviation. At this point in the video, this is the first indication that something is going wrong. It's very common to train to this, where if you have any sort of engine issue, you want to pull away from the other airplane in a formation setting and climb as high as you can. Altitude gives you options in time, because you want to get up high away from the ground so you have time to process and see what your options might be for an alternate landing spot to glide to. And also, the higher you get, the safer the margin of envelope is for the ejection seat. At this point, I see the airplane has been righted. You want the airplane as wings level as possible. You want your ejection vector to be up and not sideways. There would have been a tremendous sense of urgency and panic to get out of the airplane right now. The ejection sequence, when you pull the handles, the first thing to go is in fact the canopy. The canopy needs to clear away. The next step in the video that I'm seeing is the first plume of smoke. It's a big rocket charge that propels the seat out of the airplane, and that would create this smoke. In this jet, each occupant must pull their own handles and eject themselves. I just couldn't speculate who exited the airplane first in this case. We call it the E word, the ejection word, and it's a word you don't take very lightly, and we don't casually say it in airplanes for the fear that someone might respond to that. What I'm seeing at this point in the video is the second plume of smoke, and it is not long after the first one, and so to my mind the command to eject occurred and both handles were pulled in pretty rapid succession, and that's the way it's supposed to go. It's quite a violent experience coming out of a jet with a rocket propelling you out in a matter of half a second. There's a lot that you sort of visually take in. Some people black out. In this case, because the emergency occurred very low to the ground, they didn't have the luxury of time and altitude. So this is a perilous situation in any aircraft, and when I watched it the first time, my heart sank.
At a growing memorial outside the airport, Canada's Minister of Defence, along with members of the Snowbirds, came to remember and pay tribute to Captain Jen Casey.
Having this display demonstrates to them how much we appreciate what they do for all of us.
Nearby at the crash site, Air Force investigators are focused on the wreckage still strewn across lawns, trying to piece together what led up to this. No! No!
What are you looking for when you see that video?
David McNair is a former investigator with the Transportation Safety Board.
But I listened to hear if I could hear the airplane that was climbing, and if you expect it was climbing, you'd have an engine increase of thrust. Didn't hear that, so I'm wondering if there was some sort of engine problem.
Robert Mitchell is a former commander of the Snowbirds and still flies in air shows. He knew Casey personally.
You know, it's obviously horrific and tragic, and you don't often think of one of the passengers in an airplane and the Snowbirds being hurt like this and are killed.
Mitchell says it was not uncommon for the public affairs officer and a mechanic to ride in the jets in transit. On Sunday, pilot Captain Richard McDougall and Captain Casey were on their way to Vancouver Island. Mitchell says each would have had to pull their own ejection handle, and officials confirmed they both ejected before the crash. As for the safety of the Tutor jets, which were originally manufactured in the 1960s, Mitchell says he has no concerns.
I would go get in that jet today and fly it. I have thousands of hours flying the Tutor jet with the Snowbirds and even in pilot training, and I never question the airplane.
Officials say the jets are checked before each takeoff, and every 2 years they're essentially torn apart and rebuilt. But something did go horribly wrong, and it could take a year for the investigation to be complete. Briar Stewart, CBC News, Kamloops.
The Canadian Forces Snowbirds have been touring the country to raise spirits during this pandemic. But tonight, the Snowbirds are mourning the death of a team member killed when one of their jets crashed in British Columbia. Captain Jen Casey was a public affairs officer with the Snowbirds, originally from Halifax, Nova Scotia, a province touched yet again by tragedy. Tina Lovegreen begins our coverage from Kamloops tonight.
All eyes were fixated on the sky as the Snowbirds took off this morning, but then the unexpected.
He just crashed. Oh my God!
At first I thought the barrel roll was maybe a trick that the pilot was doing. But seeing the pilot eject and then the plane take a nosedive, obviously it wasn't a trick.
Witnesses took these videos showing 2 puffs of black smoke coming from the plane. Then the jet came crashing down into the front yard of a house. Halifax-born Captain Jen Casey was on board and died in the crash. She joined the Armed Forces in 2014 and the Snowbirds 4 years later. A former journalist, she worked her way up to public affairs officer with the Snowbirds. The other pilot landed on the roof and survived.
Amazingly, I don't know how he survived. I don't know how he survived that, because I don't think his parachute opened.
Blocks away, Dana Hings and her daughter jumped into their truck and were one of the first on scene.
There were already 2 other people there, one doing chest compressions.
The debris stretched over 3 different homes.
It was rather flabbergasting to hear the boom go off and come running outside and see smoke billowing out from his house and so on.
Dozens of first responders reacted quickly, and the city also quick to offer assistance.
And so this accident today really shakes us to our core, but we will respond to it in every way that we can.
In an Instagram story posted on Saturday, a Snowbirds pilot said the team was dealing with some electrical malfunctions. They also had said the weather wasn't suitable, with some low cloud cover making it unsafe to fly through. What caused this crash is still unknown and to be investigated.
And Tina joins us now from Kamloops. You've learned more about the condition of the other Snowbird.
We have, Ian, and the Prime Minister offered his condolences to the families as well as to the entire Canadian Forces Snowbird team, adding that for the past 2 weeks they've been flying over Canada, uplifting the nation's spirit during this difficult time. And the other member who was on board who survived, we know that his injuries are serious but not life-threatening, and he has been identified as Captain Richard McDougall, a 34-year-old from New Brunswick, and we're hoping to learn more about his condition in the coming days. Ian?
All right, Tina Lovegreen in Kamloops tonight. Let's go now to Anita Bath in Vancouver. And Anita, you've been talking to experts to get some insight into where the investigation could go from here.
Ian, a team from the Royal Canadian Air Force sent from Ottawa to look into what happened. Key to that could be any communication from the aircraft in those final moments. That could shed light on any problems they may have had. And the fact we know there is one survivor, well, that pilot will be key in the investigation as well. But you can see here the two planes are in formation together, and then there's a problem, and one plane ends up doing a steep climb to a higher altitude.
What you're trained to do is if there is a problem, say with the engine or with power on takeoff, you're instructed to zoom, you're to climb up to as much altitude as you can. You want to convert your airspeed into altitude and then either sort the problem out or if you have to eject.
And in the long history of the Snowbirds, there have been other crashes.
Yes, in fact, before this, there have been 8 other deaths. The planes have been in service since 1963. Over the years, there's been a lot of talk about replacing the jets. In fact, they were once supposed to retire this year, and then a decision to modernize them and keep them going until 2030. Upgrades do happen all the time, and there is a rigorous maintenance schedule. This footage you see here was posted over the weekend. It appears to show those checks happening. Now, I spoke with several experts today. Some say age has nothing to do with this. Others say that will definitely be part of the investigation.
There are airplanes around that are older, but typically those kind of airplanes aren't subjected to a lot of vertical forces. This is one thing that, it's a difficult thing to maintain an airplane that's older, getting parts. The engine itself, when I flew the airplane, was quite a reliable engine.
Now, I actually spent some time with the victim in this crash, Jen Casey, last summer at the Abbotsford Air Show, and I distinctly remember her telling me how grateful she was to have that job and how much she loved the Snowbirds and being a part of that team. This really is a country that does love that team as well, and people across Canada will be mourning with Casey's loved ones tonight. Ian?
All right, Anita, thank you very much.